Hello everyone, it's Greg from Edinburgh Renaissance Fencing Academy here. Today's video is an opinion piece, which is to say it is definitely subjective. So I'm going to give my view on a particular topic, and you can go away and make up your own mind whether you agree or disagree with what I have to say. The main point is just to think about the topic in a careful and considered and critical way. Recently I attended an event, the Excellent Small Sword Symposium 2024, which was held here in Edinburgh, in fact. And during the course of this event, I was able to speak to various different practitioners and instructors. And this topic came up several times in conversation and even during some of the classes. Which is modern sports fencing techniques versus historical techniques from the old treatises. Now, I mean this not only in the sense of comparing these things, but also how do these techniques fare against each other in a free fencing bout? So if somebody uses a modern fencing technique against a historical fencer, is it effective? Now, I have to say, both from anecdotal evidence from other people and also from some personal experience, that modern fencing techniques are surprisingly effective in free fencing. So it's not unusual for modern fencers to rack up more hits against a historical fencing opponent than they receive. So this is quite an important consideration if you're a long-term practitioner of historical fencing. If you circulate widely in the HEMA community, you are sure to encounter people who practice sports fencing or who come from a sports fencing background. And so you are going to go up against them from time to time. So if they can score more hits than you in a bout, that could be a problem. So what's going on here? The rest of the video is going to be a discussion on this issue and what I personally think about it. Okay, so before we get into the real analysis of the situation, perhaps I need to define what I mean by modern fencing techniques. So I'm basically talking about things which are rarely or never found in historical treatises, but which are commonly practiced in modern Olympic-style sports fencing. These are things like very bouncy or leaping footwork, fencing with a refused blade, so in other words, consistently avoiding blade engagement, very long explosive lunges, special moves like the balestra and the flesh, certain infighting techniques as they call it in sports fencing, and so on and so forth. So why do these things seem to land more hits against historical fencers than vice versa? So my view on this boils down to three ideas. The first thing we need to consider is the relative levels of skill and experience of the two participants. If the modern sports fencer has trained a lot more than the historical fencing practitioner, they are more likely to win. And vice versa is also true. A newbie sports fencer going up against a very experienced historical fencer is very likely to lose. So that's the first thing to be aware of, that the personal skill of the participants will be probably the single major deciding factor in a one-on-one bout. So you need to think about that if you're analysing the results of a particular exchange or competition, like who had the more experience. And that means the most hours spent in the saddle training, developing their skills. Okay, so let's now imagine we are talking about two fencers that have approximately equal levels of skill and experience, and the modern fencer scores more hits than the historical fencer. What is going on in this case? Because it does happen. So there are basically two possible explanations for this. One is the idea that modern sports fencing is better than older styles of fencing. So this theory espouses the idea that fencing consists of a linear evolution of styles over time, and as fencing has developed over the years, it's become more and more refined, reaching a point of perfection in the modern form. And so modern techniques can defeat older techniques because they're better, they're more refined. You can find this idea in quite a lot of sports fencing instruction books. For example, this obscure one that I happen to have an old copy of. This is the Foil Fencer's Pocket Book by W.M. Zaloff. So it's from the mid-20th century. And in the introductory notes to this, the author basically outlines a kind of potted history of European fencing and how it was moving towards the perfected form of French foil in the modern sports style. Interestingly, you can also find this theory espoused by popular fantasy author Steven Erikson, whose work I really enjoy, actually. His Malazan fantasy books are really good, gritty fantasy stuff. He's also a very experienced practitioner of sports fencing. He's an epicist. I'm going to post a link to an interview with him below. So it's a written interview. You can find the text down there. So he describes his personal experience of taking his épée along to an SCA event somewhere in North America and wiping the floor with his historical fencing opponents. And he goes on to explain that it's because he thinks that the techniques he's using are the perfected form of the art, as opposed to these cruder, older styles that his opponents were trying to use. So this is definitely a widely held belief. The alternative explanation is one that I personally believe in. So I actually strongly disagree with Mr. Erikson's proposed explanation. I think that modern fencers and historical fencers train in a different style because the two disciplines are trying to prepare their practitioners for completely different situations. Historical fencing is all about preparing the practitioner for a real life or death encounter with sharp weapons. So the emphasis is on being very careful, slowly going into the bout, taking the utmost caution to not be struck by the opponent on the way in to deliver an attack. Because any injury with a sharp sword could be potentially fatal, so you want to avoid it if at all possible. In sports fencing, the practitioners are being prepared to score more points than the opponent, which encourages them to be very forward, to be very aggressive. And essentially, they can, to a large extent, ignore the opponent's weapon, or at least ignore the threat of being struck by the opponent's weapon, because there's no particularly serious consequences to being tagged on the way in. So if you have somebody who, in terms of our historical fencer, is moving slowly and carefully because they do not want to be hit in any way, so they're focused, let's say, 60 to 70% on defense and only 30 to 40% on attack. And their opponent is focused 90% on the attack and only 10% on the defense because they don't really care if they get hit or not. Then, of course, the person who's giving everything to their attack is way more likely to score more touches than the person who's being a lot more defensive. So for me, that's the real explanation about why modern techniques appear to be more effective than historical techniques when we put them head to head within a modern kind of training seminar environment. So I guess that leads us to the concluding section of the video, which is, what is the solution to this issue? Is there a solution? I'm honestly not really sure. if you're trying to recreate an authentic historical combat using authentic historical techniques, then it requires both participants to mentally buy into the idea that they need to fear for their lives and they need to be 60 or 70% focused on defense and only 30 to 40% on attack. If one person doesn't have that attitude and feels free to just launch in very aggressive attacks one after the other, the whole fight is going to break down and not represent, in actual fact, a genuine combat situation anymore. So I guess all I can say is, for those of you who are out there in historical fencing clubs, it's a good idea to try to foster this mentality, this martial mentality of real combat situations and caution as you approach the exchange, versus throwing caution to the wind and leaping forwards to the attack. But it's quite hard to come up with any other ideas for solving this problem. It's something you just have to bear in mind when you're studying historical styles. At any rate, that's my opinion on the matter. I think it's something interesting to go away and think about, and maybe take a moment to stop and remember and analyse any bouts that you've had where you've tried to use historical techniques against modern techniques, or vice versa. Okay, I think I've said enough on the topic for today. Hopefully that is thought-provoking stuff for you. I'll be back soon with another video. Until then, take care everyone. Bye.